The December wind whipped through the bare branches of the oak tree outside my kitchen window as I stared at my phone screen, reading the text message for the 5th time. Oops, we forgot to tell you. 7 words that felt like a punch to the gut. I'm Margaret Thompson, 67 years old, and I've been hosting Christmas dinner for my family for over 40 years. This year, apparently, I wasn't even worth remembering. I sat at my worn kitchen table, the same one where I'd rolled out countless pie crusts and wrapped presents late into Christmas Eve nights. The oak surface bore the scars of 4 decades of family life, knife marks from hurried meal preparations, water rings from countless cups of coffee shared with friends, and a small burn mark from when Sarah was 7 and tried to help me make cookies for Santa. The silence of my empty house seemed louder now. My daughter Sarah had married David 3 years ago, and slowly, I'd watched our family traditions slip away like sand through my fingers. First, it was Thanksgiving. They'd started alternating between families. Then Easter became low-key affairs at restaurants instead of our traditional egg hunt in the backyard. But Christmas had always been sacred. Christmas had always been mine. The text had started innocently enough. I'd simply asked David about their Christmas plans, hoping to coordinate our usual family gathering. Hey David, what time works best for Christmas dinner this year? I'm thinking 2 p.m. like always. His response shattered something inside me I didn't even know was fragile. They'd made plans without me. Complete plans. Reservations at some fancy resort in Colorado, apparently booked months ago. I scrolled through our previous text conversations, looking for clues I might have missed. Had I been too presumptuous? Too demanding? I remembered my own mother, how she'd clung to traditions sometimes at the expense of everyone else's comfort. Was I becoming that person? The afternoon light was fading, casting long shadows across my linoleum floor. I'd already bought the turkey, a 20-pound bird sitting in my freezer, mocking me with its size. I'd picked out presents, carefully chosen after months of listening to their casual mentions of things they needed or wanted. The house felt like a stage set for a play that had been canceled without notice. My neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, knocked on the door, probably wondering why my usual Christmas lights weren't up yet. Every year by December 1st, my house blazed with warm white lights that I'd spent an entire weekend carefully arranging. This year, they sat in boxes in the garage, forgotten casualties of my emotional turmoil. Through the frosted glass, I could see her concerned silhouette. Part of me wanted to pretend I wasn't home. But loneliness is a heavy burden to carry alone during the holidays. Margaret, everything okay, honey? Her voice called through the door. I wiped my eyes and opened it, forcing a smile that didn't reach my heart. Hey, if you're enjoying this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button. There are 7 more chapters of this emotional journey coming your way. Mrs. Rodriguez's warm brown eyes immediately saw through my forced smile. Carmen Rodriguez had lived next door for 15 years, and she possessed that maternal intuition that transcends language barriers. She held a steaming casserole dish in her weathered hands, the ceramic painted with bright Mexican flowers that reminded me of the pottery we'd bought together during a local craft fair years ago. "Mija, you look like you've been crying," she said, stepping inside without invitation. That's the thing about Carmen. She never waited for permission to care about someone. Her presence filled my kitchen with warmth and the comforting scent of cumin and cilantro. What happened? I showed her the text message, watching her face transform from concern to indignation as she read David's words. Ay, Dios mío, they did what? Her accent thickened when she was upset, and I could tell she was fighting the urge to say something much stronger in Spanish. She set the casserole down with more force than necessary, making the spoon inside rattle. It's fine, Carmen, really. Maybe I was too presumptuous, thinking they'd want to spend Christmas with an old woman. Maybe they need their space to build their own traditions. Basta. Stop that right now. She grabbed my hands with surprising strength, her calloused palms warm against my cold fingers. "You raised that girl, Margaret. You taught her everything. She knows about family, about love, about making a home. I watched you with her when she was little. The way you'd sit with her for hours helping with homework. The way you'd drive across town at midnight when she had those terrible nightmares during her teenage years." Carmen had immigrated from El Salvador 30 years ago with nothing but hope, determination, and 2 suitcases. She'd worked 3 jobs, cleaning offices at night, watching children during the day, and selling tamales on weekends to send her children to college. Now she ran a successful catering business from her kitchen, but she'd never forgotten what it felt like to struggle, to feel invisible. "You know what we're going to do?" she continued, her voice gaining the strength I'd heard her use with her own children when they needed tough love. "We're going to make this the best Christmas you've ever had, but first, we're going to figure out what's really going on with your daughter. Because this isn't like Sarah. That girl has never been cruel, not once in all the years I've known her." She was right, of course. This wasn't like Sarah. My daughter had always been considerate, thoughtful to a fault. She'd call to check on me when she heard storms were coming through my area. She'd remember my doctor appointments and follow up the next day. If she'd gotten distant lately, there had to be a reason beyond simple thoughtlessness. Carmen opened her casserole dish, revealing perfectly formed tamales wrapped in corn husks, their tops tied with thin strips of husk like tiny presents. The scent filled my kitchen with memories of block parties and shared celebrations. "Eat," she commanded. "You can't solve problems on an empty stomach. And then we're going to call Sarah and get to the bottom of this." The tamales were perfect. Tender masa filled with seasoned pork that reminded me why Carmen's catering business had grown from weekend sales to feeding entire wedding parties. The pork had been slow cooked with chilies and garlic until it fell apart at the touch of a fork. And the masa was light, almost fluffy, perfumed with the corn husks it had been steamed in. But even her comfort food couldn't ease the knot in my stomach as I dialed Sarah's number. Carmen sat across from me at the kitchen table, her presence both supportive and fierce. She'd positioned herself like a general preparing for battle, her dark eyes focused and determined. In her hands, she held a cup of the strong coffee she'd made while the tamales heated. Coffee that could wake the dead and had gotten her through decades of early morning shifts. "Mom?" Sarah's voice sounded strained when she answered, tired, in a way that went deeper than physical exhaustion. There was something brittle about her tone, like glass that had been cracked but was still holding together. "Hi, sweetheart. I got David's text about Christmas plans, and I wanted to talk to you about it." I tried to keep my voice neutral, non-accusatory, but the hurt was still there, coloring every word. There was a long pause. In the background, I could hear what sounded like papers shuffling. Maybe the television turned low, and David's voice, muffled and distant, saying something I couldn't make out. The sounds of a household in tension, of people trying to whisper their way through a crisis. "Mom, we should have called you. I'm sorry." Her voice cracked slightly, and I could picture her the way she used to look as a little girl when she'd broken something valuable, that mixture of guilt and fear that made her look so young and vulnerable. "Things have been really complicated lately." "What kind of complicated, honey? You know you can talk to me about anything." I meant it. I'd always meant it, even during her rebellious teenage years when she'd tested that promise repeatedly. Another pause, longer this time. I could hear her breathing, that shallow, careful breathing people do when they're trying not to cry. Carmen reached across the table and squeezed my free hand, her touch steady and reassuring. "David lost his job 6 weeks ago," Sarah finally whispered, the words tumbling out like a confession. "The construction company he worked for went under. The owner had been skimming money from contracts, and when it all came out, everyone got laid off without warning. No severance, no benefits continuation, nothing. We've been trying to figure out how to tell you, and then his parents offered to pay for this trip to Colorado, and we thought it might be easier to avoid the whole Christmas thing this year." My heart broke for different reasons now. I thought about all the signs I might have missed. David's quieter demeanor at our last family dinner, the way Sarah had changed the subject when I'd asked about their plans for home improvements, the stress I'd attributed to normal young married couple. Adjustments. Sarah Elizabeth Thompson Miller, why on earth would you think you couldn't tell me about David losing his job? Because you already worry about us so much, Mom. And because David's been really struggling with it. He feels like he's failed as a provider, especially with the baby coming and everything, and wait. I sat up straight, nearly spilling my coffee. What baby? The silence stretched so long, I thought the call had dropped. Carmen's eyebrows shot up and she leaned closer to the phone. Surprise? Sarah said weakly. I'm 12 weeks pregnant, Mom. We found out right before David lost his job. The timing has been challenging. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button if you're invested in this family drama. More revelations coming in the next chapter. Sarah, honey, why didn't you tell me any of this? My voice came out gentler than I'd expected, maternal instincts overriding hurt feelings. Across from me, Carmen nodded approvingly. She'd raised 4 children and understood the delicate balance between offering help and preserving dignity. Her own experiences had taught her that sometimes the people we love most are the hardest ones to be vulnerable with. Mom, you don't understand. David's been barely sleeping, applying for jobs every day. He's got spreadsheets tracking every application, every follow-up call, every rejection. It's become an obsession. His family keeps making these subtle comments about how he should be providing better for me and the baby. How when they were starting out, men didn't lose jobs. They found ways to make things work. I could hear the exhaustion in my daughter's voice, the weight of trying to hold everything together while her world shifted beneath her feet. This wasn't the confident young woman who'd graduated college with honors and landed her dream job at the environmental nonprofit. This was someone overwhelmed by circumstances that felt impossible to control. His father keeps talking about back in my day, and his mother keeps asking if maybe I should consider going back to work earlier than planned after the baby comes. When they offered to pay for this Colorado trip, it felt like charity. But David said he couldn't say no because it was the only way we'd have any kind of Christmas. He's been so depressed, Mom. Some days he doesn't even get dressed. And you thought I'd judge you both? I asked quietly, thinking of all the times I'd faced my own struggles as a young mother. How I'd sometimes been too proud to ask for help even when I desperately needed it. No, Mom. I thought you'd try to fix everything, and David's already feeling emasculated enough. He comes from this family where the men are supposed to be these strong providers, these pillars of strength who never show weakness. He's been beating himself up about not living up to that standard, and I didn't want to add your worry to everything else he's carrying. Carmen gestured for the phone, and I looked at her questioningly. She nodded firmly, so I put the call on. Speaker. Sarah, mija, this is Mrs. Rodriguez from next door. I'm here with your mother, and I need to tell you something important. Oh, hi, Mrs. Rodriguez. Is Mom okay? Your mother is heartbroken, but that's not why I'm talking to you. I want to tell you about my husband, Miguel. When we first came here from El Salvador, he was a civil engineer with 15 years of experience. He'd designed bridges and buildings, managed construction crews of 50 men. But here, nobody would recognize his degree. His experience meant nothing. Sarah was quiet, listening to a story she'd never heard before. He spent 2 years working as a janitor in office buildings while studying English at night and taking classes to get American certifications. 2 years of feeling like he'd failed our family, like he wasn't the man I'd married. He'd come home with his hands raw from cleaning chemicals, so tired he could barely help the children with homework, and he'd apologize to me every night for not being able to provide better. But you know what I told him every day? That a man's worth isn't measured by his paycheck. It's measured by his character, his love for his family, and his willingness to keep trying even when everything seems impossible. David sounds like a good man going through a hard time. That's not failure, mija. That's life. Carmen's words seemed to resonate through the phone connection, creating a moment of profound silence where healing could begin. I could hear Sarah, crying softly, and my heart ached for all the pain my family had been carrying alone, while I'd been focused on my own hurt feelings about canceled Christmas plans. "Mrs. Rodriguez is right," I said gently, thinking about the David I'd come to know over the past 3 years. "Sarah, I've watched David with you. I've seen how he lights up when you walk into a room, how he remembers little things like your favorite coffee order and that you like extra blankets when you watch movies. I've seen him fix my leaky faucet without being asked and spend entire afternoons helping elderly Mr. Peterson with his yard work. A job loss doesn't change any of that. But Mom, we can't even afford proper Christmas presents this year. David wanted to cancel everything because he was embarrassed about not being able to buy gifts like he used to. He's been working odd jobs, painting houses, helping people move, anything he can find, but it's not steady income. His parents offering to pay for Colorado felt like the only way to salvage some dignity." Carmen and I exchanged glances. She nodded toward her kitchen window, where I could see her own modest home, neat and welcoming, with a small garden she'd cultivated over the years, filled with vegetables and herbs that stretched her grocery budget and connected her to the homeland she'd left behind. "Mija," Carmen said, leaning closer to the phone, "let me tell you about the best Christmas my family ever had. It was 1995, our 3rd year in this country. Miguel was still working nights as a janitor, and I was cleaning houses during the day, while the children were in school. We had maybe $50 for presents for 4 children, and even that felt like a luxury we couldn't afford." She paused, and I could see her remembering, her eyes growing soft with the memory. "You know what we did? We made everything. Cookies from scratch using recipes my grandmother had taught me. Ornaments cut from cardboard and decorated with whatever we could find, buttons, fabric scraps, glitter from the dollar store. Miguel carved little wooden toys by hand, working in the garage after his shifts. The children helped with everything, mixing cookie dough, painting ornaments, wrapping. The homemade gifts in newspaper we decorated ourselves." "But that's different," Sarah protested, though her voice sounded less certain now. "You were building something together, creating a new life. We feel like we're falling apart, like everything we'd planned is crumbling." I took a deep breath, thinking about my own early years of marriage, the times when money had been tight and the future uncertain. "Sarah, you're carrying my first grandchild. You and David are facing challenges together instead of running away from them. You're learning what marriage really means, not just the easy parts, but the hard parts too. That sounds like building something pretty important to me." There was shuffling on the other end of the line, and suddenly David's voice came through the speaker, hesitant but determined. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm sorry. I should have called you myself instead of hiding behind text messages. I've been too ashamed to face you, to admit that I'm not the provider I thought I'd be." "David, sweetheart, there's nothing to be ashamed of. Construction work is unpredictable. You know that better than anyone. The economy, dishonest employers, market fluctuations, none of that is a reflection of your worth as a person or a husband. And you're going to be a father. That's something to celebrate, not hide from. But I wanted to provide better for Sarah and the baby. I wanted to give them everything they deserve, and instead, I can't even afford Christmas dinner. I feel like I'm failing at the most basic level." Carmen leaned toward the phone, her voice firm but kind. "David, can I ask you something? Do you love my neighbor's daughter?" "More than anything in the world. She's the best thing that ever happened to me." "And are you going to keep looking for work? Keep trying to build a good life for your family? Every single day until I find something. I'll take any honest work, do whatever it takes." Then you're already providing everything that really matters. The conversation continued for another hour, tears and laughter mixing as we finally addressed months of unspoken worries and fears. By the end, we'd made a decision that felt both natural and revolutionary, Christmas would happen at my house, just like always. But this year, it would be different. This year, it would be about family supporting family through difficult times. About being real with each other instead of maintaining perfect facades. "We'll contribute what we can," David said, his voice stronger now, less hollow than it had been at the beginning of our call. "I can handle all the setup, the decorating, the cleanup. I'm actually pretty good at organizing things, and I've got nothing but time right now. And I make a mean apple pie, learned from my grandmother before she passed. And I'll bring my famous green bean casserole," Sarah added, and I could hear the smile in her voice for the first time. "The baby might not let me eat much these days. Morning sickness has been brutal, but I can still cook. And Mom, I want to help with all the prep work. I miss spending time in your kitchen." Carmen was already planning, her mind working, at the speed of someone who'd organized countless events. "I'll bring tamales and pozole and my tres leches cake. And David, my son Roberto, just opened his own electrical business after working for someone else for 10 years. He's been looking for reliable workers, people with construction experience who understand how buildings work. If you're interested, you should talk to him." David's response was immediate. "Mrs. Rodriguez, I would be incredibly grateful for any opportunity. I know electrical work, did some of it on construction sites, and I'm a fast learner. I just need someone to give me a chance." "Roberto values character over everything else," Carmen said firmly. "He'll give you more than a chance if you're willing to work hard." After we hung up, Carmen and I sat in comfortable silence for a while, processing everything we'd learned. The December darkness had settled over the neighborhood, but somehow my kitchen felt brighter than it had all day. The weight I'd been carrying, the hurt, the confusion, the loneliness, had lifted, replaced by something that felt like purpose. "You know what I realized today?" I said finally, watching Carmen organize the leftover tamales with the efficiency of someone who'd fed large families for decades. "What's that, mija?" I've been so focused on maintaining traditions exactly as they were that I forgot traditions need to grow and change with families. Maybe this is exactly the Christmas we all need. Messy, imperfect, real. Carmen smiled, the expression transforming her weathered face. And maybe your grandchild will grow up hearing the story of the Christmas when the family came together, during the hard times, instead of falling apart. Those are the stories that matter. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of preparation, but it felt different from previous years. Instead of doing everything myself, I was part of a team. Carmen and I spent hours in my kitchen, teaching each other recipes and sharing stories. She told me about Christmas celebrations in El Salvador, where families would walk from house to house singing carols and sharing food with neighbors, where the season was about community rather than competition. "We could do that here," she suggested, one afternoon while we were making cookies. "Visit some of the elderly neighbors who might be alone this Christmas. Mrs. Patterson down the street has been so quiet since her husband died in the spring. And that young couple in the blue house, the Johnsons, they're both working multiple jobs just to pay off student loans. They probably can't afford much of a celebration." Sarah called every evening, updating me on David's job prospects and her doctor appointments. Hearing about my future grandchild, the baby's heartbeat at the latest checkup, the way morning sickness was finally starting to ease, their discussions about names and nursery colors made every conversation a gift in itself. But the real surprise came 3 days before Christmas, when David called with news that would change everything about our holiday celebration and our family's future. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you're enjoying this heartwarming journey. The biggest twist is coming in our next chapter. "Mrs. Thompson, I got the job." David's voice practically vibrated with excitement through the phone, the first time I'd heard genuine joy from him in months. "Roberto hired me, and it's not just any job. It's a partnership opportunity. He wants to expand the business, and he thinks my construction background combined with electrical work could open up whole new markets for commercial renovation projects." I sank into my kitchen chair, overwhelmed with relief and joy so intense it made my hands shake. David, that's wonderful. When do you start? Monday after Christmas. And Mrs. Thompson, the salary is actually better than my old job. Roberto says, if the partnership works out the way he hopes, within 2 years, we could be running one of the most successful electrical contracting businesses in the county. We're going to be okay. More than okay. Sarah got on the line, crying happy tears that I could hear through her voice. Mom, we want to do something special for Christmas now. We want to pay for everything, the turkey, the decorations, all the side dishes, all of it. It's our way of saying thank you for not giving up on us when we were too scared and too proud to ask for help. But Carmen was shaking her head vigorously beside me, and I understood her reasoning completely. She'd spent enough years balancing pride and necessity to know that this wasn't about who paid for what anymore. It was about something much deeper. Sweetheart, that's incredibly generous, but we're already planning the most beautiful Christmas. Carmen has been cooking for days, testing recipes and making enough food to feed half the neighborhood. I've got the house decorated exactly the way you remember from childhood, and honestly, the best gift you could give me is just being here with your growing family. But Mom, Sarah, let me tell you something I learned this week. Christmas isn't about perfect circumstances or expensive gifts or who can afford what. It's about showing up for each other, especially when times are hard. You and David showed tremendous courage by finally letting me in on your struggles. That vulnerability, that trust, that's worth more than any fancy dinner or expensive presents. David's voice came through clearly, filled with an emotion I hadn't heard from him before. Actually, Mrs. Thompson, there's something else. Roberto wants to meet you and Mrs. Rodriguez this weekend. He said anyone who could bring a family together, the way you two did, anyone who could see past immediate circumstances to what really matters, is someone he wants to know personally. He's thinking about expanding into event planning and catering partnerships. Carmen's eyes lit up like Christmas morning. She'd been talking for months about growing her catering business beyond weekend tamale sales and small birthday parties, but she hadn't known how to take the next step, how to make the connections that would open bigger opportunities. He's got contracts with several office buildings and apartment complexes, places that host events but don't have in-house catering, David continued. When I told him about Mrs. Rodriguez's cooking and how she's been building her business one satisfied customer at a time, he said that's exactly the kind of reliable partner he's been looking for. But there's one more thing, Sarah said, and I could hear the smile in her voice, the happiness that comes from having a future to plan for again. We want to start a new tradition. Every year from now on, we want Christmas to be about helping another family that might be struggling. Maybe we could adopt a family through the church, or volunteer at the shelter, or find other ways to pay forward the kindness we've received. We want our baby to grow up understanding that family means taking care of each other and our community. I thought about Carmen's stories of Christmas in El Salvador, about communities that celebrated together regardless of individual circumstances. I thought about all the neighbors I'd lived near for years without really knowing their struggles or their joys. You know what? I said, feeling something shift inside me, a sense of possibility I hadn't experienced in years. Let's make this Christmas the beginning of something bigger. Let's make it about building the kind of community where no one spends the holidays alone, where everyone has a place at someone's table. Christmas morning dawned crisp and bright, with fresh snow covering my neighborhood like a wedding dress, pristine and full of promise. I woke up earlier than usual, not from anxiety this time, but from excitement that made me feel decades younger. The house smelled like Carmen's pozole, which she'd started simmering at dawn, the rich aroma of hominy and chili, and slow-cooked pork filling every corner of my home with warmth and welcome. David had arrived early to help with final preparations, and the transformation in him was remarkable. Gone was the hollow-eyed, defeated man who'd been too ashamed to face me just a week ago. This David moved with purpose, setting up tables and arranging chairs, his face bright with the knowledge that he had meaningful work waiting for him after the holidays. Sarah looked radiant despite her morning sickness, her hand resting protectively on her still small belly. The pregnancy glow people talk about was real. There was something luminous about her, as if joy was radiating from the inside out. "Mom, I have something for you," she said, pulling out a small wrapped box with shaking hands. Inside was a simple silver locket, beautifully engraved with tiny flowers around the edge. When I opened it, there was an ultrasound photo inside, the first picture of my grandchild, a tiny peanut-shaped promise of future joy. "Your first grandchild," she whispered. "Due in June. We wanted you to be able to carry the baby with you. Always." I started crying before I could stop myself, but these were tears of pure joy, the kind that wash away months of accumulated hurt and worry. David wrapped both of us in a hug, and for the first time in months, our little family felt not just complete, but stronger than it had ever been. Carmen arrived with her entire extended family. Apparently, she'd decided this Christmas needed to be a celebration of community rather than just our small gathering. Roberto brought his wife and 3 children, and they immediately started playing with the neighbor kids who'd gathered in our backyard for snowball fights. The sound of children's laughter filled the air, mixing with Spanish and English in the musical way that makes America beautiful. "This is how Christmas should be," Carmen said, surveying the organized chaos of multiple families sharing food and stories and traditions. Loud, messy, full of love and full of life, like my grandmother's house in San Salvador, where Christmas lasted for days and everyone in the neighborhood was welcome. The afternoon brought more surprises. Mrs. Patterson from down the street, who'd been widowed last spring and had been spending holidays alone, joined us for dinner. She brought homemade dinner rolls that were so good they disappeared within minutes, and stories about Christmases from decades past that had the children gathered around her chair in fascination. The Johnsons, the young couple struggling with student loans who'd been living on ramen noodles and hope, brought homemade bread and stayed for dessert. Mark was working on his master's degree in social work while Maria finished her nursing program, and they lit up when Sarah and David shared their idea about making Christmas about helping others. Somehow, our small Christmas gathering had grown into a neighborhood celebration that spilled from my house into the yard, with people bundled in coats and scarves, sharing hot chocolate and stories under the winter sky. As evening approached and people began heading home, I found myself standing in my kitchen with Sarah, David, and Carmen, washing dishes and reflecting on a day that had exceeded every expectation. "You know what's funny?" Sarah said, drying a serving platter that had belonged to my mother. "A week ago, I was dreading Christmas. I thought it was going to be the worst holiday we'd ever had. Now I can't imagine it having been any other way." David nodded, scrubbing a pot with the kind of thoroughness that spoke to his construction, workers' attention to detail. "And to think it all started because I was too embarrassed to admit I'd lost my job. I almost robbed us of this whole experience, this whole transformation." Carmen dried her hands on my dish towel, looking around at the beautiful mess of a day well lived. "Sometimes the best gifts come wrapped in problems, mija. This family needed to remember how to be vulnerable with each other, how to ask for help, and how to offer it. That's what real love looks like. As they prepared to leave, Sarah hugged me tightly, and I could feel the slight roundness of her belly between us. My grandchild, safe and growing, and already bringing our family together in new ways. "Mom, thank you for not letting us disappear into our problems. Thank you for showing us that family means showing up, especially when it's hard, especially when we're not at our best." Later that night, as I sat in my quiet house surrounded by the beautiful debris of perfect imperfection, gift wrap and cookie crumbs, and the lingering scents of a dozen different dishes, I thought about next Christmas. There would be a baby then, taking his or her first Christmas photos in my living room. There would be new traditions to build and old ones to adapt. There would be Roberto and Carmen's expanded catering business to celebrate, and David's partnership to toast. I picked up my phone and started typing a text to the family group chat we'd created during the week. Next year, let's make sure no one in our neighborhood spends Christmas alone. Let's make sure everyone has a place at someone's table. Who's with me? The responses came quickly. Heart emojis from Sarah. Absolutely, from David. I'm already making a list of families to invite from Carmen and from Roberto. My company will sponsor whatever you need. Some of the best stories begin with the words, "Oops, we forgot." This year, I learned that sometimes what looks like an ending, canceled plans, broken traditions, disappointed expectations, is actually just the beginning of something more beautiful than you could have imagined. Remember to subscribe and like if this story touched your heart, because family stories like this remind us what really matters during the holidays, and there are more stories of hope and community coming your way.